Hey BookTube, I am here today to talk mostly about my March TBR plans. I don't know how many of these plans I will actually stick to, but hoping that I can get through some books in March for March of the Mammoths, and then also I have some books I want to read for Women's History Month. And then I also have some books that carry over from this month that I also want to finish as well. I'm probably not going to mention the carryovers. I'm just going to talk about the stuff for specifically mostly Women's History Month and then a couple other books that I want to get finished. Um, Before I dive into that, though, update on my currently reading for February. I've been reading a lot of books because February is Black History Month, and so I finished this morning Upending the Ivory Tower, Civil Rights, Black Power, and the Ivy League by Stephen M. Bradley. This book examines each of the 8 Ivy League institutions in the United States, and it looks at how the civil rights movement and the students at these universities, specifically the African American students, worked to not only integrate into the Ivy League universities, but also to make changes within these universities to make them more, I guess you could say, friendly or hospitable to people of color. And so it shows how early on these institutions, they would admit just a few black students, but they wouldn't let them live in the residence halls with the white students. And so they were often having to find other means of housing. They also weren't allowed to eat in the dining rooms or the dining clubs at these institutions. So they were having to find other places to eat. Oftentimes other black families in the towns that these Ivy League institutions are in would sort of host the students, give them a place to sleep, give them meals, that sort of thing, since they weren't welcome on campus. It also looks at how these institutions, they just admitted a very small number of black students and how the students protested to get the university to admit more students. And then also, in some cases, to make sure that the university didn't buy up properties and destroy housing for people of low income and also people of color in neighborhoods around the university. This was the case at Penn in Pennsylvania, where the university was willing to buy up all these properties to create another, I think it was like a science center or something, but it would have taken away all this low-income housing, and so the students protested that. And then they did, sit-ins. They walked off campus and like stayed at a church in one case to protest these low enrollment numbers, that we need more, black students being enrolled in these institutions. And they also protested and not just protested, but they also petitioned to have black studies programs or courses included in the university curriculum. So given that I work in higher ed, not at an Ivy League institution by any stretch of the imagination, but given that I work in higher ed, this was an interesting read for me, and one I felt that was really important given that I am in academia. And so I highly recommend this if you are in any way a part of academia and higher education in any fashion, or if you're just interested in how black students sort of integrated in the problems that they faced in Ivy League institutions. So that's that. This is the only book I finished this week, given that I had other stuff going on. But I did make some progress in The Defender, How the Legendary Black Newspaper Changed America by Ethan Mckelly. And I'm really, really loving this. I think this could end up being one of my favorite reads. I'm going to read more of it today. I don't think I'm going to finish it, unfortunately, in February, so it's going to be a carryover into March. But this has been really good so far. I just absolutely enjoy every chapter. Um, there's a lot of horrible things that happen that the Defender covers, but it's been very eye-opening to read this and to see just how Robert Abbott, who was the gentleman who started this, the Defender, the first black newspaper, how he really worked to make this newspaper into this, institution that it became, and how he ended up being so wealthy because of it, and the reach that it had. So, anyway, really enjoying this so far. I will probably do a full review of this when I'm finished. I'm not going to do that with this one, but I definitely will with the Defender. Alright, now moving into my reads for March. I talked in a previous video about my March of the Mammoth TBR. I'm just going to briefly mention those two books. The first one is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. Had this sitting on my shelves for years. I started it at one point as a library book, didn't get it finished, so I am going to read it for March of the Mammoth. The other one I'm going to read is Stalingrad by Vasily Grossman. I've heard Steve Donahue talk about this book so many times, and it is a high time that I get to Stalingrad and then also at some point Life and Fate. So going to also hopefully get through that for March of the Mammoth. So these are my two March of the Mammoth reads. Who knows what will happen. Hopefully March is a really good reading month for me. And then my reads, I have one that I was hoping to read in February, but I didn't get to it. And that is 400 Souls, A Community History of African America, 1619 to 2019, edited by Ibram X. Kendi, and Keisha N. Blaine. This is the newest book that Ibram X. Kendi has put out, and so I really want to get to this. It's also a library book, so this is definitely high up on my TBR for March. And then moving into my reads for Women's History Month, I just randomly picked books off my shelves. I had a couple that I was pretty sure that I'm going to read, but these others may get substituted out for other things. Who knows? We'll see. One of the ones that I'm definitely going to read if I read nothing else from Women's History Month, because I've had this book for years and I really want to read it, and that is Revolutionary Heart, The Life of Clarina Nichols and the Pioneering Crusade for Women's Rights by Diane Eichhoff. This was Forward Magazine's Book of the Year award winner. And so this looks at Clarina Nichols, who was a newspaper publisher, stump speaker, political agitator, and ally of mistreated women everywhere she went. So I want to read this. A book list says the name Clarina Nichols deserves to be placed next to those of such luminaries as Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So yeah, definitely want to read this in March. If I read none of the other books that I have, I want to read this one. Then I also would like to get to a recently published novel by one of my favorite authors, and that is The Upstairs House by Julia Fine. Julia Fine was the author, or is the author of What Should Be Wild, which was one of my favorite books back in 2018, and this is her latest book. It just came out this past week, and so I want to read this. This looks at postpartum depression, I believe. Yeah. And it's got some magical realism elements to it as well. So I'm looking forward to reading this because, like I said, I really loved What Should Be Wild, and so I want to definitely read this. If I get this finished, this will definitely get its own review. And then these others, I would like to get to them, but I don't know, considering I have some other books that I need to finish up, and I have some library books, and, who knows. But these are just some other options for Women's History Month that I had on my shelves that I can possibly read in the month of March, because some of these I've had for ages. I'll start with one of the ones I've had for a long time. I got this at a library book sale, and that is The Harvey Girls, Women Who Opened the West by Leslie Poling Kempis. This is about the women who worked in the Harvey houses that were along the various stops of the railroad. And so I want to read this. Both of the towns that I have lived in, my college town and then also my hometown, had Harvey houses back in the day. And so I think this would be an interesting piece of history to read, something a little bit different. So hoping I can get to this. It's not super long, and there's a lot of pictures, so I don't see why I couldn't. And I started it at one point and then put it down for other things. So that's a possibility. Another possibility is Forgotten Women, the Artist by Zing Shang. I have no idea if I pronounced that right. I apologize. And so this is pretty much what it says on the cover. It's artists who have been forgotten, women artists who have been forgotten over time. I have a whole set of these. I have Forgotten Women Writers and Forgotten Women Scientists. I think I've read the writers, but I haven't read this one or the scientists. I can't remember for sure. I need to look back on Goodreads. I know I haven't read the artists. And this is one of those that's sort of forcing me outside of my comfort zone because I'm really into like the scientists and the writers, but artists I'm not quite as like into. So figured this would be good for me to, like I said, to get out of my comfort zone a little bit. So there's that. And this I could dip in and out of because it's just short little biographies of various artists. So this is not like a nonfiction book where it's, chapters or whatever, right? You can sort of dip in and out. You don't even have to read this chronologically necessarily. And then the last one goes back to my obsession, I guess you could say, or my interest in, not really obsession, in women writers, and so that is The Female Pen, Women Writers and Novelists, 1621 to 1818, by B.G. McCarthy. I saw this on some other booktube channel. It might have been Johnny Keene, but I'm not positive. And I thought it sounded interesting, so I bought myself a copy. And this is another one that looks at various women writers. This is one you can't really dip in and out of. Like, you need to read it chronologically, given the chapters. But I think this should be interesting to read, so we shall see if I get to that. I don't know if I will or not, but we shall see. Anyway, so those are some of my reading plans for March, as well as discussing a couple of the books that I am currently reading or have finished. I have no idea what I'm actually going to end up reading in March. You could basically say that my main plans for March are my two March of the Mammoth books, and then probably these two, as well as finishing up some of my other reads that I currently have going. Because guess who's still reading that Sylvia Plath biography? Anyway, so yeah, that is my reading update for you all. I hope you all have had a good week, and I will talk to you again soon. Thanks, BookTube.